Welcome to the first community chat of 2021. My name is Tiffany Miller, Vice President of Policy for Communities and Schools at the National Office. Community Chat is a Facebook Live conversation series that features one-on-one interviews with thought leaders within the CIS network, as well as experts across research, policy, and the nonprofit sector. Community Chats airs monthly right here on our CIS Communities and Schools Facebook page. As we welcome in a new year, we also welcome in a new historic administration. This year, we saw our first woman elected to be Vice President of the United States, the first Black woman to be elected Vice President of the United States, the first South Asian woman to be elected Vice President of the United States. How amazing is it to see that glass ceiling actually being broken in our lifetime? Today, we take a moment and discuss the impact that the Biden-Harris administration can have on communities and schools and the families that we serve. As we continue to navigate uncharted waters with COVID-19, racial inequality, we are constantly reminded that families of color are disproportionately affected and impacted by the pandemic, government policies, and racial injustice. A few weeks ago, our national president and CEO, Ray Saldana, had a virtual conversation with former Secretary of Education and CIS National Board member, Arne Duncan, to discuss the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Watch and listen as they take a deep dive into this important topic.
Now that we've got a new administration and we may have a window in the next year or two to do some great work, I want you to think about maybe your own experience and how it might compare to the incoming Secretary of Education, because there's so many competing interests for a new cabinet member, so many demands of your time. I want to know what it's like to sort of to get the news that you are now going to be charged with this department, and maybe if you can tell us if the incoming education secretary has their own lane to create their own agenda, how much of it is guided by the president or his advisors, if you'll talk us through what that experience is like.
I spent a lot of time, not yesterday because of all the craziness, for the past couple of days with Miguel and just sort of talking and trying to help in any way I can. I think he's a great guy, and it's obviously a beyond daunting task. And we came in with lots of challenges, and obviously the new administration is a whole different level of challenge. So, every situation is different. I honestly had some real advantages that I had a strong personal relationship with President Obama. We had worked together for years. We were personal friends. And we had talked through a lot of these issues together, for years. I visited schools together here in Chicago, had done policy work when he was in the Illinois legislature. So, we were on the same page and knew what we wanted to do. And that sort of gave me a jump start and frankly, a lot of freedom and flexibility. Miguel obviously didn't know President-elect Biden, or they don't have a relationship. And so it'll take a little bit more time, but I think obviously it can be an overwhelming agenda. What I tried to talk to him about is you got to try and do 2 or 3 things really well. If you have 50 priorities, you can't get anywhere. Clearly thinking about how you reopen schools safely, how you keep schools open, how you find kids who are lost, how you help kids to catch up. Those are the kinds of things that doesn't matter who's coming in, any incoming administration, any incoming new Secretary of Education, that's got to be front and center.
Yeah, well, I think you hit on it. What might be the sort of the particular focus of President Biden's administration on education, and it is around, how you work through the pandemic, how you make sure you find lost students, and a good note for us that is important that I'm updating members of the board and members of the network who are updating me is that there is this movement now for let's focus on the non-academic issues just as much as we focus on the academic, because it's been exposed so much around not only the curriculum, but the basic needs that students face. So I wonder if you think, Miguel, or if you could see an avenue for what wraparound supports are going to look like. Is this a movement you think will take ground? Is it among the 50 priorities? For us at CIS, it's like integrated student supports is like the evidence-based back of it. And in places like Chicago or Houston, Atlanta, we know it works, but the administration may have a ton in front of it. How do you think we look at that?
Well, I just think it's such a common sense idea that has to be at the forefront. And just to go back to your earlier question or just comment that this can't be a time where people are scared or intimidated to back off. I mean, the amount of work, we've all tried to work hard, we've all tried to have impact, but I don't think there's ever been a time that I can remember where there's more work that needs to be done. And so we all have to work harder, we all have to work smarter, we have to work more collaboratively because of what our kids are facing. And I've done a weekly call since March, since the start of the pandemic, with school superintendents, with folks in the nonprofit space around food insecurity and keeping food going, supply chains of food to kids through schools, to the community, to their families. And as you know so well, schools just aren't places of academic learning, they're social safety nets. And so for me right now, there are a couple layers. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to make sure that kids are fed. And my mother always said, 50 years, if the kid's stomach is growling, it's hard to learn. And that's always been true and always will be true. And schools have done a heroic job through the pandemic. But that's sort of the baseline to make sure that we're feeding kids. Secondly, obviously, that their social and emotional needs are being met. And we have so many kids who are dealing with fear and anxiety and trauma prior to the pandemic. Add the pandemic, add George Floyd's murder, add what happened yesterday, whatever you call it, insurrection, I don't know what you even call it. What our kids are dealing with is extraordinary, across the country, in their communities, and in their families. We have tens of millions of kids whose parents were living, pretty fine, but paycheck to paycheck, and those paychecks have disappeared, and their whole lives have been upended. So we have to meet kids' social and emotional needs. So physical needs, nutrition, health, social and emotional needs, and then that's the foundation for the house. That's the underpinnings. If we do that, then we have to talk about AP calculus and biology and what we're doing academically. But we have to make sure that foundation is strong, and we have to be working in all of these areas together. And obviously, I think this is what CIS has understood forever. This is what CIS has stood for forever. And so there's no shortage of work. There's no shortage of opportunity. There's no shortage of need. And to step up boldly and work on all of those fronts, because they're not in conflict, because they are absolutely mutually reinforcing. Now more than ever, it's like, let's go. Well, I think you said two things in there that I think are really important for us as one of the largest providers of wraparound services in the country. And it's kind of an important point to say that even though we're the largest provider of evidence-based wraparound student supports, we're in 2,800 schools. There's 80,000 Title I schools all across the country. We know that there is plenty of work. It's not just going to be, CIS, but I think the second thing you said in there is that at least from your relationships with the administration, that these are things that are top of mind. Like, let's get the basics right here. And at some point, they're going to be looking around and saying, who's doing this well? And the good news to report in places like Chicago, but really throughout the whole network, where we had kind of braced ourselves through the summer, thinking that school districts were going to make some really tough decisions about budgets and budget cuts, partnerships with nonprofits working in schools, that we would sort of dwindle from that number. And the good news is we actually added close to 200 schools that we're in, even in the midst of the pandemic, even in the midst of the sort of predictions of what this would do to school budgets. So I think what we have is an opportunity with the administration who knows what they need to do and are going to be looking around to find out those partners. And can you tell us maybe the mechanics of what the vehicle looks like if you're the Secretary of Education and you're wondering, okay, how can we support the work that's scalable? Who do we interact with? Is it through the education transition team? Is it through the secretaries? Is it through their chiefs? Well, I guess it's a sequential thing. So obviously it's through the transition team now, and he's been nominated. Obviously hasn't been confirmed. Once he gets confirmed, then he'll be building a team. But now's the time to start to talk, to build those relationships. And one thing I just add that I think has been not enough focus on it that CIS could think about is finding those lost kids. And again, by the estimates I've seen, it's sort of staggering. It's like 2 to 3 million kids who have not been back to school since March. So we can talk about how far kids have fallen behind and all the other issues. But if you have 2 to 3 million kids, supposedly in Texas it's 250,000 children, which is what Margaret Spelling's told me. Who is finding those kids? And that's something you can't Zoom and do that. There are lots of benefits of technology. This is old knocking on doors, out there walking, relentless outreach, going back 5 times, figuring out what's going on, who's going to do that. And I don't know who's going to take that lead, but just would encourage CIS to think about, is that, again, it's more work, it's harder, it's whatever. But if I was a superintendent today, if I was Secretary of Education today, if I was a principal of a school today, I'm thinking about the kids I'm serving, but I'd be spending a whole lot of time thinking about the kids that I'm not serving at all.
Yeah, I'm just grateful that you mentioned that. There's 2 things that come to mind. There was, of course, the maybe 4 weeks ago, a 60-minute special just on this sort of lost students concept. And the Christian Science Monitor wrote something that featured communities in schools, specifically because when these communities are having people knock on their door, they're not, especially in the midst of a pandemic, they're not just opening it to anyone. And so when they see a recognizable face in that's my CIS site coordinator, or that's the person I work with at school, like there's a reason, there's this banner here, serves 2 functions. Actually, my son sometimes runs through, so it gives me 2 seconds to stop. But there's a reason there's both lockers and a front porch. Like that's how we pivoted in this space. Like, we have to improve on the design. If not, how are you going to be helpful to superintendents and to principals who really need you? I do think that's something specifically we need to focus and outline around the strengths and highlight of what we've been doing for the last several years.
Yeah, I just think, again, just thinking about the timing, we're obviously in January now. We can't wait till September to catch up. Like, we'll have kids that are a year, 18 months, 2 years behind. So for me, it's like a sprint between now and September. It's like an 8-month sprint. The school year, the school calendar is irrelevant. I guess theoretically school ends in May or June, depending on where you live. But what are we going to do? Take the summer off after all this time off? That makes no sense whatsoever. So over these next 8 months, how do we find every lost kid? How do we get them in the mix? How do we help kids catch up as much as we can? I've been talking a lot about National Tutoring Initiative. How do we make sure everyone's fed? How do we make sure we're dealing with trauma and fear and loss and all those different things? And then how do we create a much higher baseline in September than where we're at today? And if we don't, the cost of inaction, the cost of just compounding trauma and compounding loss and compounding lack of learning, if that's where we start in the fall, we're going to have a whole bunch of kids around the country who frankly will never catch back up, and we will just lose them. And they may be lost now, but I don't want to have a lost generation. And that's what we all have to be working to prevent and to avoid.
So I want to follow up on an important piece around what the folks within the administration, past the sequence of events that's going to happen over the next few months, what may be competing in terms of priority, and just related to something that you described in your initial. I mean, you came on sort of coming in through the 2008 financial crisis. There was a stimulus opportunity then, and you explained to me once that when you put $100 billion into K through 12, most of that competing demand was just keeping teachers in their jobs. And so I wonder if, as we're talking about the importance of having somebody in the school to find the students, to build relationships with, does an investment in something like that also compete with, do you predict in the next few months, teachers staying within their jobs because of municipalities or states who are suffering?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you got to weigh all these things. And for me, finding kids, that's not necessarily a single person's job. That can be CIS, that can be teachers, that can be counselors, that can be social workers, that could be the coach, that could be the cafeteria lady. To your point, this is all about relationships. I always say relationships change lives, not programs. Mm-hmm. And it'd be, for a principal, local, I'm just making this up. Who are the 35 kids in my school who we don't know where they are? Who has the best relationship? And frankly, this should have already happened, but it hasn't happened. So that's why I'm pushing now. Who is the best relationship in the school with a partner like CIS, whoever it might be, a church, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Who is the best relationship and who's going to bring that kid, that child, that family back into the fold? And when a child's missing, obviously that's a sign of something else going on. There are multiple issues going on in that house. It's not just, I forgot to go back to school in March. Yeah. And so this has got to be an all hands on deck. Who is best equipped? Who has the best relationships? Who's going to be the most relentless? Who's the most trusted? And let's figure this out together.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece. And it also speaks to what I've heard preliminarily out of some of the transition team conversations I've had the privilege of just sort of sneaking into or peeking into. They're talking about all the big important issues and how much of a coalition is going to be necessary for this. And I know, sort of somebody like Linda Dowling-Hammond, who's leading the transition, understands the concept of all of the assets within community, speaking of community schools and communities in schools and wraparound services. So we think all of the leading indicators for us tell us that there is an opportunity here for us to work together, to be strong partners. But at the end of the day, like, we've got to create some impact. Our students deserve the best of what we can offer. And so we're trying to prepare ourselves for that, even at a time that, we thought we were going to be contracting as an organization. They seem to, of course, be a bigger demand going into it. So excited about that. I want to sort of wrap up with one just last question here. Arne, you're going to be, I think, called on as an advisor. People are going to be looking to you as somebody who's gone through this experience for your expertise. In your preliminary conversations, do you think, give me a sense of maybe a hope that you have going into 2021. There's a lot of pieces that have fallen into place over the last 24 hours, regardless of the crazy speed bump yesterday. How are you feeling about this coming through now?
Well, it's a long term. I'm extraordinarily hopeful. Like, there really is light at the end of the tunnel. And going back a few months, I couldn't quite see that light. You didn't know if that light was going to be there. As we talked about having control of the Senate and the House in terms of a legislative agenda, that's obviously an absolute game changer. That's, had we just won one of those Georgia seats, it would have been very different. To win both was monumental. So that makes me even more hopeful. So it's like both an extraordinarily dark and difficult and disturbing time, but I'm very, very hopeful about what we can do together. To state the obvious, it's going to take us months to get there. I mean, we had the highest death total for corona yesterday, but that death toll keeps going up. Those are our kids. Those are their family members. That's directly impacting us. Those aren't somebody else's kids and somebody else's families. That's ours. To climb out of a really difficult economy is going to be very difficult. And then how do we deal with this issue of structural and systemic racism? None of this is easy. It's going to take time. I love President Biden. I can't tell you how overjoyed I am that he won, but he's one man, and we all have a role to play. And I'll say all of this starts, there's things you got to do at the national level, things you got to do at the state level. But for me, all of this starts at the local level. This starts in individual schools, on individual blocks, in individual homes. And we have to work at every single level simultaneously. But sort of waiting for a savior from on high, that's not how this works. It's your team, it's amazing teachers, it's folks every single day, counselors rolling up their sleeves in a really tough time and finding ways to meet kids where they are, wherever that might be, and to just move them a little bit forward every single day.
I appreciate you saying that. There's no shortcuts to this. January 20th, the world's switch doesn't turn on, and it's hard work. The hard work of teachers and principals. They've got enough on their plate, and the work of our site coordinators to try to meet all the demands that are coming at our students, and at the same time trying to help them make sense of the world is important, especially like we started this conversation, for many of them who just don't have a lot of margin to make errors. And in that way, we're trying to not only ensure that folks are playing by the rules, but that we are adjusting the rules so that it's more fair, and more equitable to students that we serve. So Arne, I want to say thank you for being part of the conversation today.
What an insightful conversation about our new administration and the direction of communities and schools. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please be sure to mark your calendars and join us next month for our February edition of Community Chats. Be well and stay safe. Thank you.